Today we're going to be turning a Raspberry Pi and maybe an old USB hard disk that you might have laying around into a network attached storage device. Now you can go buy one of these network attached storage. This is an old model, but that's kind of the problem with these, is they get outdated. If I want to put more storage in there, this one's not capable of handling a very large storage device. This Raspberry Pi is going to allow me to upgrade anytime that I want to. I can add more disks. If a disk were to fail, this has its own special file system that I can't repair it, because that's the only thing that understands how to read those disks. So this is going to make things a lot more expandable. Plus, you might just have this stuff laying around collecting dust, and you could turn it into something that's actually useful. So this is going to be a very long video. You don't need to know anything about what I'm going to do. I'm going to walk through everything. If you already know most of this information, or you're kind of a guru, this probably isn't the video for you. Basically, if you can set this up by yourself, now you don't have to buy a kit, but that's the easiest way. This is made by Kit. It came with everything: power supply, Raspberry Pi. Today we're going to be dealing with the Raspberry Pi 4, and I'm going to walk you through every single step. Step by step. It's going to take a long time, but all the information is gathered into this one video, so you don't have to go anywhere else. Now, I'm personally going to be using the Ubuntu desktop primarily, but I will pause and go into the Windows system in case that's probably what you're going to be using, is Windows. I will show you how to do things on the Windows system. Basically, what you're going to need is you're going to need either to buy a kit like I did, or you're going to have a functional Raspberry Pi. I'm going to show you how to install Raspbian from Noobs, so you need to know how to use the Noobs system. It should tell you, if you've worked with Raspberry Pi before, you should be familiar with that. Or if you already have a system running Raspbian, that's perfect. Other things you're going to need is everything to get a Raspberry Pi up and running. You're obviously going to need some kind of storage. I went out and bought a USB hard disk. If you have one laying around, perfect. It doesn't have to be a certain size. Any size will work. Even a USB thumb drive, if you wanted a small network storage device. You're going to need Ethernet cable. Not everybody has those, but if you don't have that, it's going to hang on boot, and it's probably going to take you, it might work, but it'll take you a lot longer. The other things you're going to need a USB mouse, USB keyboard, and that's basically all you're going to need. If there's interest, there might be some bonus material that I go through. If you have any questions, feel free to ask. I'll leave links to all the software that I'm using in the description. The other thing is the image that I'm using for the Raspberry Pi. I'm using Ubuntu Server is the OS I'm going to be installing on there. Now, you can do this through Raspbian, but it's got a graphical interface, which is going to eat up a lot of processing power that's just not necessary if you're just making a network drive. So I'll put a link to the image that I'm using. Now, I'm not saying that's not going to mess anything up. I didn't create the image, so this is at your own risk. You just put it on an SD card, and obviously you're going to need an SD card for your Raspberry Pi. They won't boot off any other devices. Okay, these first couple clips are just going to be basically when you get it out of the box. You're going to have what's called Noobs, and when you boot up, it's going to ask you which OS do you want to use. If you're hooked up to the internet, it's going to load in a couple extra options. I'm just going to put Raspbian on. It's pretty self-explanatory. You just kind of click next, but I'm going to show exactly what needs to be done. Kind of in fast forward here, just in case anyone's not familiar with the process. Okay, when you get Raspbian installed, it's just going to quickly ask you to set up a couple things, set up your language. Again, pretty self-explanatory. We're going to rush through this. If you had any questions, go ahead and ask, but it's pretty self-explanatory. Okay, really all we're going to do with Raspbian is we're going to open up the terminal, which is going to be this icon at the very top here, and type these commands: sudo apt-get update, $, sudo apt-get dist upgrade, and then we're going to put a -y so that that's says yes, we want to install any updates. Alright, and then we're going to do sudo rpi-update, and that's the meat and potatoes of this. This is going to actually update the firmware. And then when it's done, we are just going to shut this unit down and take the SD card out so we can go over to the desktop with it. Okay, so we're back on the desktop here, and just got a clean SD card. All of the partition information has been deleted off of it. We've got our download here of the Ubuntu 18 server pre-install. We're just gonna double click that. We're running this in Ubuntu desktop, and we're gonna go down and select, this is my SD card, and we're going to restore. It's 2.5 gigabyte image. You're going to need a card at least that big. Hopefully you've got one larger. And start restoring. Restore. Everything on there is going to be deleted, so you don't want to have any of the files that you plan to put on here, have them separate off of your SD card before you run this restore. We can put stuff on afterwards, but this is going to go and erase the entire thing. And we need our password, and off we go. And hopefully once this quote-unquote restores, we'll be able to just pop this back into our Raspberry Pi, and we will boot up into Ubuntu server, and we'll show that in just a minute. Alright, we're done. We can see in disks here that this partition information has now changed. So let's go ahead and we'll pop this back into our Raspberry Pi and see what we come up with. Alright, so once you get 7-zip installed and the image downloaded, you're going to right click on it and click extract here, and then it will turn it from .xz file into a .img file. And then we will use this program called all-image to actually put it on the SD card. First thing you'll do is you go down and click on write disk, and then in the drop down you'll select which disk is your SD card. Mine happens to be D. And then you'll click browse and find your image, not the .xz file, the .img file that we extracted earlier. And then you will click write disk, and you'll get a couple of looks like error boxes, but you just go ahead and click yes. This just means that you're going to erase everything on that disk. Alright, so we've got our card back in the Raspberry Pi, and here we're booting it up, and here we go. We're loading it in text. That means we were successful. The first time I tried this, I know I had unhooked my my wired connection. It won't boot if you unhook a hard wired connection. It wants to see a DHCP server, so it just hung here just a minute ago where it went to that, where it showed that box with the IP address and everything. So plug it in, wired to your router just for the initial setup, and then I sat like an idiot for quite a while. You also need to change your password, but in order to get that prompt, you have to hit enter on the keyboard. I was just sitting there like a dolt, expecting something to happen after all that text, but you have to hit enter in order to start interacting with it, and then it will ask you to change the password. A little boo-boo, and it demanded a tougher password, so I had to put a different one in than I wanted, and then I just went ahead and updated and shut down the computer for now, and in a minute we will see if we can set up Samba and add our other hard drive, and that way we can actually make this useful instead of just a text editor on the screen. Okay, so now I'm going to show you, I got PuTTY working. I want to show you what you need to do to get that working so that you can break away from having to use a display and having to have a USB keyboard separate from maybe your desktop or your laptop computer. Just a couple things here. That this should be turned on by default when you use the image, if you're using the same image I am, but you'll want to type this command in first while you're still connected with your display and your keyboard. So log in as normal. First thing, you want to check that this SSH is turned on, so it's this command here. Oops. Okay, so it's sudo systemctl status SSH, and you're looking for this active running. It's highlighted in green. So that's the first thing you want to check. And then the next thing you'll do, if that's good, then which it should be, then you'll do ifconfig command, and this, what you're looking for is this number right here, this inet. You should be hooked into your router, which is, if it's like most, is going to hand out an IP address to this device. This device or this IP address is going to change if you happen to shut the Raspberry Pi down or lose power for any reason. This number is the number that you need to get PuTTY to connect. We're going to change that so that it doesn't change if you lose power, because it's going to make life a lot easier. But as of default, that number could be anything. This just happens to be the number that mine received. So with this information, you're going to write that number down, and then you'll get PuTTY installed on your desktop computer. And it should come up. I mean, it's real simple. You don't need to worry about a lot of this. You just need to check, make sure that you're using an SSH connection, and it's default port 22. So I mean, if you just get a clean install, this is what it should look like. And you're just going to put that number that you've got, you're going to put in this box right here, and just like I said, make sure that this is SSH, and then you're going to hit open. I'm going to connect once. You can accept this if you want. It's pretty self-explanatory, but and then you're just going to log in as normal. Default login was set up as Ubuntu, and then your password that you changed it to, and voila, you're in on your desktop computer. I don't know if I'd put the display away yet, because like I said, if you lose power, that number is going to change and you're going to need to go get it from the device. Next, we will get that to static so that we can make use of this PuTTY without needing that display anymore. Then we can kind of clean things up. Alright, well, I'm going to take a minute here to kind of show a couple things here. I was kind of taken aback. I didn't know they changed interface managers on this latest versions of Ubuntu server. So I'm gonna show a couple things here. These latest versions, I guess they changed over to net plan, and I'm more familiar with IF up down. So we're gonna look, or I'm gonna give you the command at least to look, because you might not be using Ubuntu 18. You might be using an old version. I mean, I'm assuming you're using what I'm using, but we'll kind of swerve off the path here and give you the ammo to maybe branch out if you're not exactly following this tutorial and trying to get what you want to work. So what we're gonna do here is we're gonna look and make sure that you are using net plan versus IF up down, or because I'm not going to cover IF up down since the default is going to be using this net plan. Now if you happen to have IF up down, you can install net plan, and it might get a little hairy, but you theoretically can make the switch. And again, that's really outside the scope of this video, but we'll kind of veer off into the weeds a little bit. So first thing, we're gonna check and see which we're gonna show a list of installed applications here. So what you're gonna need to put in is apt list and a double hyphen installed. Now that's gonna give you a great big list. This is all the stuff that's installed, and you know, by default you're probably gonna you might even have more than this, because I kind of cleaned up a couple things. But so this is a net plan, you can see, is installed here, and the other one is the other thing is to clear this screen. You just type clear, and it'll get rid of all that if you have too much on the screen and it's kind of making you crazy. The other thing you're gonna look for, so I had net plan. The other thing is called IF up down. You're going to look for that in the list. If you have IF up down, then it's going to be different, but you can do apt-get install net plan, and that should get you net plan installed on there. But then I would imagine you want to remove IF up down, and that's going to get kind of hairy, so you'll have to make sure that I don't know that like installing one and removing the other isn't gonna kind of freak your system out a little bit. So that, like I said, that's kind of outside the scope. If you want to follow along with net plan, that's how I plan to do it, just because that's what is on here by default, and want to get familiar with what's actually installed on here, and that looks like that's what they're going to go with in the future. Apparently IF up down must be kind of dated. Alright, so this is going to be kind of a longer segment. I'm going to apologize in advance, but I'm going to try and cover a lot of bases here, introducing this next segment. First of all, for anybody who's using IF up down instead of the net plan that I'm actually going to be covering, I'll kind of give you a push in the right direction, and then you're going to have to, you know, kind of brave it on your own. But when you go to edit your interfaces file, instead of doing what I'm going to show, you're going to do sudo nano /etc/network/interfaces, and that's going to edit the interfaces file, and you'll have to research that a little more on your own. But everyone else, just go ahead and ignore that. But either way, you're still going to need the following information. First thing, there's going to be, we'll run another command. We've already done the if config. Okay, and that's going to give you, we need your inet address, you need this net mask, we'll put this broadcast address in there and make sure that that's this eth0 interface that you're pulling that information from. Another command you're going to need to do is, for the sake of being thorough here, we're going to put the default gateway in. So the command for that is route-n, and you're just going to look for this number here under gateway. That's going to be likely the IP address of your router. So we're going to need that number. Ignore this LO interface. That's just a loopback interface, and that's not anything we're going to deal with. The other thing is, well, you may be wanting to use the wireless interface on this board, since it is available, and in order to show that, obviously there's, when you do the ifconfig, there's only 2 interfaces showing. Fear not. So we would do IP space A. That's going to show us that there is a third interface. It's just turned off, this no op state or down, this WLAN 0, and I will cover that kind of at the same time. When I create my own config file, we'll cover what the difference is going to be. Okay, so I'm just going to take a brief section here and explain Vim and Nano to just barely scratch the surface, but this is really all you need to know about both of them. So when we go to edit our configuration files, I'm not assuming that you know anything about editing these files. That's why I'm going to walk you through this, but I'm going to show you what you need to know about both, just in case you happen to have one and not the other for some silly reason. But that's in that app list that we showed in a previous segment. So first thing I'm going to show you is Vim, which is it seems more powerful to me, but it's a little more confusing just because it doesn't have the easy list at the bottom. But if you type just Vim, it shows you this here, and it shows you that a :q is actually how you're going to quit out. But that's actually not what we're going to use if you happen to use this. So say we're going to edit a file, and you're typing along. You're going to hit escape to get out of insert mode, and then you're going to get a cursor like this, and then you are going to press type : on your keyboard, and you should get in the very bottom left there, you're going to see that your : typed. And what you're going to do to actually save the file, when you're editing it, is you're going to put WQ for write and quit. Q just means quit, W's write and quit. But since I don't want to save this file, I'm going to put Q !, and that's going to close this file, which is not really a file yet because I didn't actually place it anywhere, but I'm going to put Q with an exclamation point. That's going to quit me out without saving changes. So if you screw up, don't freak out. If you delete a bunch of stuff, just don't save it. Don't save your config file if you screw up. Just : Q ! And it won't save the changes that you made. So that's Vim, and that's all I'm going to get into for Vim. And then I'm going to go into Nano, and it's pretty obvious why I like simple things. So I prefer Nano just because at the very bottom they give you a list of all these commands. And so these carets, these are, the simpler commands is really all I'm worried about. The carets, it means press the control key down. So if you want to exit, you'll press control for this caret, and X will exit you out of the program. So it's a lot easier. They give you this all the time down here. Even when you're typing that your magic list down there doesn't go away. So like having a friend that doesn't leave you. So and then when you I just hit Control X to exit, and it asks you, do you want to save it? And then you just hit N for no, or Y for yes, as the case may be. So it's a lot more kid gloves. But as I said, I think Vim is pretty powerful too. So that's why it's still around. But that should be all you need to know about Vim and Nano. And whichever you choose, we're going to edit a config file. Okay, so we've gone ahead and we've got the information. Quick side note, you're going to want to actually do the IP address from IP space A. You're going to want this inet address. Really what you need is this slash number. Mine's slash 24. Yours might be different, but rather than ask for subnet mask, these config files are actually going to want that IP address slash number in lieu of your subnet mask. Is just a different way of denoting it. So with that, we're going to then list the existing config files, which is going to tell us, you know, if we're all on the same page. So etc net plan slash, okay, and you can see mine's this cloud init. This is just config files created by this cloud config, our cloud init. We're gonna make our own config file. If you're seeing something different than this, then you'll want to pause for a minute and figure out like why yours is different, and make sure you're not going to screw something up by following along further. You might even be able to just edit what you've got and not have to do this whole process. So just something to be more thorough. We're going to check that, check that first, and then we'll continue. Next step is going to be sudo. Don't forget that. I'm going to use nano. Again, you can use vim. So etc net plan, and then the files that we're going to create are not going to be this cloud init. We're going to create a new config file, and we're going to name it o1-netcfg.yaml. Okay, and if you're going to create a second interface for whatever reason and configure it, like if you wanted to use the wireless and the wired to connect to two different networks, and possibly even like bridge those networks, obviously this isn't a powerhouse. It's not going to do a whole lot of routing or anything. That's just more options that you can do with a server. So it's capable of doing all this stuff. It's just would be extremely slow. So we're just going to create our config file, and whether you're using your wireless network or you're using a wired network, the beginning of this is going to be the same for both. So starting out, we're going to do we're going to start with network. Okay, it's going to be version 2. Renderer is going to be network D in our case. Now the next line is going to be whether you're using wired or wireless interface might be different. So if you're using a wireless interface, you would put Wi-Fi's here, plural. Okay, but I'm using Ethernets here, so I'm using I'm using a wired interface, and if that's what you want to do, you'll do the same as I am. Okay, so under Ethernets, you're gonna put the name of your interface, or either Wi-Fi's or Ethernets, whichever one you're using. So if you're using the wired and yours is the same, then you're going to put eth0 is the name of your interface. Now if you were doing Wi-Fi, I believe it was WL0, that you would put that under Wi-Fi's here, but oops, eth0, okay, and that's just denoting like which interface we're talking about here. So the next thing is, are we going to use DHCP? So it's DHCP4, and that's what that is your network going to draw an IP address automatically from the router. Now if you're using Wi-Fi, there's a chance maybe you would want to have it suck an IP address off the wireless network. In that case, you'd hit yes. I'm going for a static IP here because it's a lot easier to know where your network storage is going to be located. You know the IP address of it. So I'm going to put no here. Okay. The next thing is now we're going to put the address that you want, and we're going to put that in brackets here. As I said, you want probably to just change the last digits of the IP address that you were handed before. Now that's not always the case, but that's, you know, very often is going to be the case that you can just get away with changing those last couple digits and you know, make it something that you're going to remember that's within your IP scheme, and that's, you know, you'll have to research that yourself if you don't know, or you can just give yourself the IP address that you currently have, or that the PuTTY had received. That's an option too. So the next thing we're going to put is that gateway, and that's going to be when we did that latest command that shows you your gateway. Now yours is likely to be close to mine. It's not necessarily going to be this, but mine happens to be 0.1. So the next thing is name servers. Now name servers, I didn't really cover. That's going to be basically so that your device can reach the internet. And if you don't ever plan to touch this thing again, like you're never going to update it, nothing, then I guess I wouldn't really worry about the name servers. But I plan to periodically check for updates to it and be able to keep it up to date. So I'm going to need name servers. Now the first addresses. So the first thing, the easiest thing to put in there for a name server is going to be your gateway. So I'm going to put my gateway, and now it's not really, it's kind of beyond the scope really to tell about this, but this basically just goes out and asks these addresses. You know, if it's looking for the internet, a web page on the internet, this is where it's going to go to look. The next thing is this is actually a comma here. So I've got my gateway address, which is going to be my router. Now you can do that too if you have a router. When you did your gateway, you can put that in there if you like, or you can put this 8888 is something I didn't really go over, but this is actually Google's name server. So if you want, you can put that in there and not put your router address. It's not going to matter. And then Google also has a secondary, which is 8.8.4.4, and you can put those two in there if you'd rather. But it's just address, you know, with the periods or decimals in between, and then a comma between the two addresses, and then the second address. So that's going to allow this device to go out on the internet. Now when you do DHCP, it's going to grab that information by itself, and you don't have to tell it how to do that. So that's just one more step to a static IP address that you have to give it all the information there. So now I'm gonna go ahead and exit this with Control X, and it's gonna say, do I want to save it? And I'm gonna hit yes. Okay, sorry about that. It's just confirming that that's actually the name of the file that you want to put on there, and you just hit enter. So then the next step is going to be that we need to test this before we apply it. Now when we go to apply it, we're gonna restart the machine because we're using PuTTY instead of, if you're still on your display, there's a way you can just shut the network down, turn it back on without having to wait for the whole thing to reboot. But we're just going to go ahead and reboot. But first we're gonna try our net plan configuration. So we're gonna do sudo net plan try. Okay, looks like everything's kosher. Okay, it's gonna allow us to use those settings. So now what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna go ahead and you probably don't have to do sudo, but sometimes it gives a fit if you try to shut down without being the super user. So I'm going to do sudo shutdown -r, so that should restart the computer, and when do I want to do it is now. So hopefully we're going to be able to ping or open this device as our new IP address as soon as this boots. And this will hang your PuTTY connection with server unexpectedly closed because the computer's shutting down. So now when I come back, we're going to see hopefully that configuration now has changed. Our PuTTY address is now going to be the new address that we typed in. Okay, so now we're ready. We've got our wired configuration typed in, and we're going to make sure that that's actually working. And I am going to go back and finish explaining what the difference is when you go to use a wireless configuration instead of this wired connection. So we're going to put our brand new IP address that we gave ourselves in this PuTTY box. Obviously got a brand new PuTTY open because it dropped out on us when we restarted the machine. We've given it enough time to reboot, and still SSH. Everything's the same except that new IP address. Now this is a good sign. You may or may not get this if you already accepted this permanently. Okay, and we're in. Now we can go ahead and do an ifconfig, and you can tell, obviously we connected, so we're already tested that IP address has changed, but it also changed under ifconfig. And I am going to list our etc/netplan again, and now you'll see our config file that we created and this cloud init file is also there, and I'm going to get rid of that later, but obviously what we did is giving us our static IP, and that's a good thing. So I'm just going to go ahead and edit my old config, and nano etc netplan /01 .yaml. Okay, so here's our config, and if you're using wireless, obviously instead of Ethernets, you're gonna have Wi-Fi's. Okay, well, we'll just go ahead and change what's gonna be different. So here you would have Wi-Fi's. Here you're gonna have wireless LAN 0 or whatever your interface, whatever it may be. Now, I don't know if, I'm assuming you're probably gonna use a static IP even over wireless, but you may or may not have this stuff. You might have DHCP turned on. The difference here is underneath all this stuff, we need to list our access point so that it knows what wireless network you are going to log on to, and what the password is, if you should have a password. Now this, I'm assuming here that you're using WPA personal. That's the only one I'm going to cover. There's, if you look up this net plan, you can figure out if you have a different type of network, how to set up. But this is the most common, is going to be just WPA personal. So that's WEP was the one with the goofy, hexadecimal passwords, and that's kind of fallen out of favor because it was not very secure. So odds are this is what you've got, as opposed to WPA Professional or Enterprise, I guess it is. So, but anyways, underneath underneath your all the other information, your DHCP or static IP information, then you're going to put access points. Okay, and oops, and then in quotation marks, you're going to put the name of your network. So the name of your network. So this is just, whatever the name of your network is. It might be something that the cable company left you with, whatever. When you click the little box to search for your network, you have to type that name exactly in these quotation marks, and otherwise it's not going to it's not going to find it. So aside from that, then underneath you're going to type your password. So colon password, or colon, on a new carriage return, password, and in quotation marks, whatever your password is here, and then close it off with your password. So that's your network password there, and that'll tell this device what it needs to log on to that wireless network every time it restarts. So then once you're done, you can test your configuration, and I think what I will do is I will enter my information here behind closed doors, and we'll see if it actually is able to connect wirelessly. So I'll go ahead and do that, and we will see if it works. Alright, so I'll go ahead and just tell you, yes, it did work. One thing I noticed I had screwed up on is right here, it needs to be WLAN 0 and not WL0, but once I figured that out, mine is actually WPA2. It did work in that instance, so should be no issues there. I'm going to go ahead and switch back to the wired connection. The only thing I did notice is that with this wireless connection, I don't know, I think it didn't like that I wanted a static IP. I think it wanted to get a DHCP address, because it took almost a painfully long time for it to boot up. So you might run into that. It's probably going to take maybe 5 minutes to boot or something, because it's sitting there waiting for configuration. But after it completely boots up, it let me go in through the wireless, and didn't have any problems. So that is the only difference that you need to change, so I'll say that's success. Now the next step is going to be, since we're going to use this as network attached storage, whether you're on wireless or wired, we've got that working. So we're going to try to get a larger disk attached to this than just the SD card that's currently in the device. So that's the next step. Okay, for the next part, we are going to add our external device as storage, and I've already run the parted-l command, and I've highlighted the first time I've run it versus the second time I ran it, to show when I plug the USB device in, there is a difference. All of this is basically down, this part down here, and this disk has been added here. This dev SDA is new. So again, that's just sudo parted-l, and that's going to show you your list of currently attached storage devices, and they have to be formatted for this to work. So don't plug in an unformatted disk and expect for it to show up in this list. So now what I've done is I've purposefully formatted the disk that I had earlier. I've formatted it to FAT32 just to show what that would look like. Now, if you have a FAT32 device, I would recommend reformatting that, just because if it's a file server, I mean, if you're going to use it lightly and you plan to move it to other devices and not just leave it plugged in, then that's one thing. But if you're planning to actually use this very often as a network drive, I would just make sure you got all your information saved off of it, and then we're going to go ahead and I'm going to format this into an ext4. Now if you have an NTFS here instead of this FAT32, you might be able to just leave that. That would be superior to the FAT32 in that instance, but if you're just going to leave it in this device, I would probably turn it into an ext4, just because it's the best at not becoming fragmented. So in order to do that, now we need that SDA device flag here, so that we can identify it. We need this dev-sda or /sda, and so that's going to be part of our next command, which is going to be sudo mkfs for creating a file system, ext4, and dev/sda, and that's where you're going to put yours. May not be SDA, it might be something else, but definitely do not put any of this down here. We don't want this. This is our SD card that our OS is put on, so we don't want to mess with that. Just our external device up here. So when we do that, it's going to ask you, are you sure you want to do it? And yes, I do. And it doesn't take all that long. It's smart enough now to do this by itself. In the olden times, you'd have to probably know a little more about this, but they've kind of made everything pretty easy. So so now if we do our parted-l command, now we can see that this file system has changed to ext4 on here, and that's what I want. Now that we have our disk formatted, we need to create what's called a mount point, and if you don't know what that is, that's fine. You can just follow along and basically do what I do. So ls is going to show us the contents of our directories. So and this mnt directory is where I'm going to create my mount point. You don't have to put it there, but I mean, that's what I'm going to do. So if we show the contents of that mnt folder, there's nothing in there. So that's what we're going to do now with this command. We're going to make directory, and I'm going to name mine sdisk01. You can name this whatever you like, or you can name it this sdisk01. Just you're going to need to know the name of this directory in the future. So after we're done creating our mount point, we're going to show some information about our drive still that we're going to need to create or edit our fstab file. So this dev SDA, yours may be the same, it may be different, but this is going to be that flag that we saw with that parted command earlier, and we're going to display some information here. So really the biggest thing is we're going to look at this unique identifier number here, this great big number, and we're going to want to write that down. So, and we're going to need that number for when we edit our fstab. Now we could use this SDA flag if we wanted to, but this unique identifier is going to be a better number to use, because if you happen to have multiple disks, or you get another disk that steals this SDA flag, from this device somehow, then it's just going to go after SDA, and this is particular to this hard drive, and that's the number that we're going to create our directory in. Okay, I'm just going to spell that last command out for you, just so in case you're on a pretty bad display, you can hear me say it. So it's sudo command, a super user do lsblk space dash d space dash fs, and then whatever flag you have. So mine happened to be / dev/sda, and that's going to filter out a bunch of information you can get from this command and just show you you're looking for your, well, mine happens to be this SDA, but you want the unique identifier number from that command. And just a cautionary thing, if you format this disk for any reason, that it's going to hand it a new identifier number. So don't take this disk out and format it again in a different computer and then expect to be able to plug this back in and have it work. It's going to give you a different number, so you would have to reset this all up, and it'd be kind of a pain. So with that information, we're gonna use either Vim or Nano again and edit this fstab file. So what fstab, this config file we're going to edit, is going to do is whenever this boots up, it's going to attempt to mount this drive so that you can actually write things to it. And so that way you don't have to go in and tell it, hey, go on this hard drive and start using it. It's just going to do this whenever you boot up. So we're going to do nano etc /fstab. Okay, now don't mess with either of these other, don't mess with anything else in here, because this has already got your information to load your boot directory and everything and mount your boot directory. So if you delete anything in here, you're going to brick your system where it's not going to know where to look for that boot directory. So just don't mess with any of that. Just go down to the very bottom here, and then we're going to add our UUID is how we're going to start out, equals, and I've got it up here so that I can read it off, and just type it exactly as it showed up before. You don't need a space after this equals, and dashes and everything to see. And it's a great big long number, but this is the best way to do this rather than just use the SDA number. So where am I? E75322A9. Okay, and then we're just going to tab over once we're done with that, and we're going to put some more parameters in this file. After we do that, UUID number, next thing we're going to put is the mount point. And as you can see in the previous entries, they didn't have this great big long thing. So this is the mount point for your boot and everything. So don't mess with that. But it doesn't matter that it's not in line with the other stuff. So we're going to put, where I'm mounting it is going to be /mnt, so that sdisk 01, and that's, again, you can put whatever you want, but you have to copy it exactly into here or this won't work. And then your file type, which might be NTFS instead of this ext4, but if you're following along, we're using ext4. The next is we're going to put a set of default parameters for this device so that we don't have to mess with too much. And then we're going to put comma with no space and put no fail. Now that's important to put in there, because if you try to boot the device up without this device or without this USB drive plugged in, if it's not set to no fail, it'll give you a hard time. So, and then the next two things we're going to put are just zeros. And yes, this is a tab here, right here. It's just when you press tab, it kind of puts it in order, so the more you type, the less space over it's going to scoot when you press tab. So everything's tabs in between. You don't need to know what these zeros mean, but they do need to be there. So that's all we need to put in there for that. So when we're done, then Control X to exit out. And do you want to save? You'll hit yes. And then it's just going to make sure that the file name is the same, and don't mess with anything, just hit enter. And that is all we need to do with that fstab. And then we're going to reboot, and hopefully hopefully your machine boots up still, and it will come up and mount that device in that mount point that we set. Now that we've edited our fstab config, now we're gonna do a shutdown -R to restart, and we want to do that now, and that's going to close out our PuTTY connection. So we're gonna have to open PuTTY again, and when you type this IP address in there, it's going to be just about long enough for it to boot, so give it like just a little bit longer than it takes you to type that IP in there, and then hit open. Now if it does connection refused, try it once more, and if it doesn't work the second time after you type the IP address in there, you're hanging on boot, and that's something may have gone wrong when you edited that file. So the second time you do it, between opening it and typing the password in, you should get it to respond. Otherwise, oopsie, I don't know. So now we're in again. So since it booted up with that fstab edited, now we're going to do the command that we did earlier in order to get our UUID to show up. So we're going to do that command again, and that's lsblk space -d-fs, and then it's still going to be this. It's likely still going to be the same flag because I haven't changed anything. So now we're showing, and it's the same UUID, but now under mount point, it's showing that we're mounted, and this is the directory that we created. So that's exactly what we want to see. So the next thing, now that we're mounted, we're going to edit our Samba config file. Now that we've got our drive set up to automatically mount, we need to go into that mount point and create a directory. This is going to be where our files from the network are going to be saved. So in order to create that is sudo mkdir, and we mounted at mnt/sdisk01, and that might be different for you depending on what you named it, and I'm going to name this directory share. Again, that's something you can name it whatever you want. So if we do a long listing of mount sdisk01 now, it shows us this share directory that we just created, but it's owned by the root user, and we need to change that. So that's going to be accomplished by the chown command, change ownership, CHOWN, and then we're going to put the user that we want to change it to, and that information is actually here, who you're logged in as, and it should be the same if you're following along, but in your case it might be different. Okay, and then we need to do the path of the directory that we want to change ownership of /share. Okay, and now if we go back and do the same command again, we'll see that ownership has changed, and that's what we want to do. That's what we want to see. Now that we know the correct user has ownership of our share folder, we're going to go in and delete the config file for Samba, or at least that's what I'm going to do. You may have a reason that you wouldn't want to do that, but if you're following along, you just have a default set of settings in there, and it's going to be easier just to erase that basically and then start over anew. So the command to do that is going to be sudo rm/etc/samba, and smb.conf is the config file that we're going to be writing. So if you do that, it erases that file, and now instead of removing it, we're going to go into nano with the exact same config file, same path, same everything. We're just going to run nano and create a new one. So to start out, it's going to be just a blank slate here, and we're going to put in brackets global and tab over Our server role is going to be a standalone server. Okay, map to guest. Now this just means whenever you basically, if you fail to log in as someone with a password, it just turns you into a guest. And that's how we're setting this up, is I'm just going to make anyone can log in without a password and edit, remove, view, delete, everything, create files in this share. Now if you don't want that, there's ways to do that. You probably wouldn't want to map to guest, but that's going to be outside the scope of this video. So and of course the next line, we want to allow guests. So and then following that, this is just going to be a kind of a feeble attempt to keep people from gaining access to the share from the internet. So what we're going to put here is I'm going to put my network address, which is going to be our usually it's just going to be your IP address turned into a 0 on the last digit. So you don't have to do this. This is just for a small amount of security's sake, /24, just like before. But as I said, the IP address has been turned in, the last digit turned into a 0. Now if you have an HDCP address, where the dynamically assigned address, you're probably not going to want to do that because you may not know what your IP scheme is going to be. But if you're not planning on ever changing your network or anything, then this will work fine. And then of course, to go with that, we're going to deny the zeros basically in this command are going to mean just deny everybody else that's not in the scheme that we put in. So next, I'm naming this share again. You don't have to. You can name this whatever. This is going to be how your share is going to be seen, like the name of, like if you wanted to name this, network disk or something, you could do that, but I'm just going to name it share. Okay, and this comment again, you can put whatever you want in here. This is you're not going to see this. This is basically just a comment about this share, in case you need to use that to identify different shares. Okay, now the path is going to be the share folder that I created, and again, you might have a different name. This doesn't need to be, the names of the folder and this target don't need to be the same. You can name them basically either one, whatever you want. Just for simplicity's sake, I put share and share. But you need to get yours correct, obviously, for this to work. So read only, no. We want guests to be allowed. Again, this is going to be, anybody can go in and edit any file on here. Writable is yes. And now this part is where we needed to change ownership of the directory that we created. So we're going to force the user, basically it's going to fake who, it's just like we went on and logged in through PuTTY and edited these files, but it's going to force the user to appear as this login, just for simplicity's sake. Now we could, theoretically you could, force the user to be root, but that's not a good practice. So that's why we changed it to Ubuntu. So, and with that, that's all we need to put in this file. So we're going to Control X to exit out, and yes, we want to save, and we want to save it as exactly what we put in. Okay, and now we've saved our config file. So all we need to do is first we want to do a command that is testparm, testparm. That's going to test the parameters of the config file that we just created. And so you might, if you have any errors here, then that would be something to look at. This Windows limit extension is nothing you need to worry about. So it doesn't say, there's no drastic errors there, and when you hit enter it's just going to show you what you just typed in, and that looks good. So since it didn't give us any errors, what we're going to do now is we're going to restart the Samba service, and that's actually going to put those parameters into effect. So with this command, that'll do that. So sudo service smbd restart. Okay, and now the Samba service has restarted, and now with these parameters, if they're good parameters, we should be able to go onto a computer and actually put something on this drive. Alright, now that we're all set up, I brought up a Nautilus browser, and on Ubuntu, to get to your share, you're going to go down to this option of other locations, and we're just going to put smb :2 /, and then our IP address of our server, and it's actually already in there, but 168.0.100. Okay, and voila, we've got share right here, and when you open it, you can just leave this checked anonymous and connect, and now you can create a new folder. You can drag things in here and drop, and obviously any computer on the network with this will be able to access this, and I'll show you on a Windows computer here in just a minute. So the first thing you're going to have to do under Windows is you're going to want to turn Samba discovery on. So we're going to go to the control panel under programs and features, turn Windows features on or off, and that will bring up this next window where you'll scroll down to the Samba checkbox, the Samba 1.0, and really you only need these top two settings checked. You don't need the server one checked for this to work, so just check those, or check the whole thing if you like, and hit OK. Okay, then what you're going to want to do is you're going to want to go to this PC or my computer and right click down by your hard drives, or really anywhere, I guess kind of works, but then you want to click on add network location, and then you will get the add network location wizard. You'll hit next, and then in this box you're going to type the IP address with these 2 backslashes of your server, and then also add a backslash, and then the name of your share. Mine happens to be share, but yours might be different. That's the info that we put in between the brackets. Okay, and then in the next box you can rename it whatever you'd like. You can name it shared folder. This is not going to affect the device itself. This is just how it's going to be labeled in Windows. So when you're happy with that, hit next, and then you can open the file location, and then we've got a the folder that we created in Linux is here under our network drive. So success.